Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me Fran Kelly, KC1NDQ. Fran probably doesn't know this, but he was one of the very first QSOs I made with a Parks on the Air park back in April 2022 when I first got on the air, or got back on the air. At the time, I really wasn't sure what all this Parks on the Air stuff was, but I recorded the number diligently, and since then I've added Fran to my log at least 5 more times, one from Ireland. So I'm really excited to talk to him today. Fran, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Let's start with Ireland because that really intrigues me. I've been able to pack up my gear and take it down to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You talked to me down there, by the way. And I'm curious what that was like to travel to Ireland with your equipment and what you had to do for licensing. I think it's part of the CEPT, but tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I checked in with the ARRL and made sure that the reciprocal agreement was valid. And if you look on their site, they tell you how to go about it. There is really no specific thing you have to do, except when you're there, add EI to your call sign. And in their case, they want it before the stroke. Now, was that true when you were down in St. Vincent?
No, actually, St. Vincent didn't have a CEPT reciprocal agreement. I ended up getting a J8 NKI call, so I had to apply for and pay for a temporary license, which I'm in the process of renewing now. But I sort of like that. That was nice to have the J8 NKI call rather than a backslash.
Right. It was a little awkward, and some people wondered exactly who I was and where I was. But it worked out all for the best. And I don't remember us making that contact. I'll have to go back and look at my logs. I was more excited to make contacts with my club members back home. And the 5-hour time difference was a problem. Propagation wasn't that good that day, but I was able to make the contact. So that was pretty cool.
Well, I do want to talk about your club membership, but before we do, what did you take for gear to Ireland?
Well, I had thought about it for a long time. I have a vacation area down in South Carolina that I was planning on attending relatively regularly. So I set up a backpack go kit to do just that. And it just so happened that Ireland became available, and I said, well, I might as well give it a shot. So I had been to South Carolina once, so I'd done the plane thing once. I investigated the battery sizes and all of that stuff, and I put together a backpack of an 891, a wire antenna, a vertical, the MFJ 1979 vertical, all of the cables. In my particular case, I was afraid of getting shut out at the airport with 160 watt hours or more battery. So I brought 2 smaller ones that I ran in parallel, which are under 100 watt hours. And all of the airlines, 100 watt hours. So that worked well for me, and I had no problems either going or coming. I was just afraid that they'd confiscate my batteries and I'd be batteryless when I got to Ireland. So it worked out fine.
Yeah, I totally relate. That's my biggest concern. I pack a 160 watt battery, which is within the regulations, but I've read a lot online where that doesn't sometimes matter depending upon who's checking
exactly.
your bags.
The regulations, say that it's up to the individual airline. And I was flying Aer Lingus, and I was afraid that Aer Lingus wouldn't like those size battery, and I'd be shut out. So in the end, it worked out fine. And I've used the batteries quite often.
So did you carry all of your gear aboard?
I carried everything but the antennas. I had the wire antenna in the backpack, so everything was in the backpack. A tuner, a small LDG tuner, and the only thing I put in my checked bags was the telescopic whip and a ground spike, and they worked fantastic. And if you looked at that picture that I took sitting on a park bench at EI 0133. That was ground spiked 1979. That worked fantastic for me.
So how often were you able to get out and activate while you were there?
Well, I only got to activate one park. We traveled the country. It was really a golfing trip. There was 24 people in the trip, and the closest park that was reasonable for me to get to was when we were in Dublin, and we were only there 2 or 3 days. So I had one opportunity to hit Dublin with everything else with the 24 people that I was with, and I got to do that park. I went to other parks to test the gear, but they weren't POTA parks. They were within walking distance of where I was staying. So I got on the air a number of times, but only one activated park.
So was it worth it?
Absolutely. Oh, I had a blast. It was definitely worth it. And since then I've been to South Carolina a number of times, and I even have a kilo in a South Carolina park very close to where I stay in South Carolina. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm the top person at that park, Hunting Island.
Well, the only reason I ask about whether it's worth it or not, I took my gear, I took an Elecraft KX3 to California just recently, and I activated twice. I made a total of 24 QSOs. So it's certainly wondering to myself, was it worth it to make 24 QSOs, two parks? But it absolutely was. Like, it was so much fun to get out. I was just learning the Elecraft. Conditions weren't great, but it was somewhat of a painful activation. It took a while to get my 14 at the first, and even longer to get my 10 at the second. But I was able to meet one of the hams that I've talked to on the air out in California, W6LEN, and that he came out and joined me at the second park, which made it all worthwhile. And I'll definitely do it again. I'm getting more and more comfortable traveling with the gear, and the Elecraft actually is going to be easier to travel with because it's just a smaller radio than the 480 I have, which is a monster to carry around. Although once I'm there, I've got the 200 watts, so that feels pretty good.
Yep. I like the 891. I have run it QRP and have been very, very successful. I like the attraction of being able to pump it up to 100 watts if we really need it. And I don't think I would have made the contacts that I did when I was in Ireland uh, with a smaller, less powerful radio. So I'm very, very, very happy with the 891.
So take me back to the club membership. Which club do you belong to?
Well, I belong to two clubs, but the one that's really active is called the Pilgrim Amateur Wireless Association, the PAWA. Tremendous group of guys. It's really run. He's only the secretary, but he's a ball of energy. Mike N1NTM. You may have got him making POTA activations or whatever in your log, and he keeps us active. He's always on the air. He's always on 2 meters. He's on the repeater. He's become a POTA activation fanatic, and he's doing very well. He's got a kilo in a couple of parks or whatever, and he keeps us hopping. He's the Energizer Bunny. He really is. And Bob, who you have interviewed, Whiskey Charlie 1 November, who was the ultimate POTA soda fanatic, really introduced Mike to activating. They did a tag team activation once or twice or whatever, and Bob showed Mike the ropes, and the rest is history. And he's done very, very well. And Bob's going to have him at the top of a mountain one of these days.
Well, I always enjoy hearing about active amateur radio clubs. I know it's somewhat of a struggle across the country to get hams involved with clubs, but I've been talking to John Gendron and Darcy Pock down at YCARS, YCARS, and they have a very active club. And in talking to Bob Farquhasian, WC1N, obviously Pilgrim has a very active club too. So that's always encouraging to see.
Yep, you never know what is going to go on. We have Zoom meetings. We started doing Zoom meetings because of the COVID situation. They've continued because we've been shut out of a few of our places that we like to meet at. So the Zoom meetings continue, and an attraction to the Zoom meetings is you can get guys to join your Zoom meeting from all over. And I've watched the video recently that you did with Bob, WC1N, where he talks about Jean Baptiste Copin, Foxtrot 4 India Lima Hotel, and the gift of the flag, which was an amazing story. And I have Gene in my log. He's a POTA fanatic many, many times, way over 50, I'm sure. And he joined our Zoom meeting at midnight or later for his local time. And he was on a Zoom meeting with us. And also Paul Nancy Lima 7 Victor. I'm doing this from memory. Out in Alaska, he was in the same meeting. So any particular Zoom meeting, in the near future, we're going to have Bob Heil give a presentation on his microphones in our Zoom meeting. So it's just a wonderful group of individuals, and we have a lot of fun.
Well, you might see my call sign in a future meeting. I've been dialing into the Y-Cars meeting via Zoom and
Very cool.
their net, and it's made it pretty nice. I don't have any active club membership here in Maine, so it's nice to reach out to these people that I do know and stay involved. Fran, tell me how you got started in ham radio.
Well, it's a long, long story. Uh, I was interested in electronics my entire life. I had a good friend who had his license at 13 or 14 years old. He was a year older too than us, and we were always playing around with his radios. And he kind of talked me into getting my license. And so I um, studied under legendary two individuals in our area, a professor of electronics and electrical engineering at UMass Dartmouth. Uh, and he's since passed away, but he was a tremendous mentor. And I got my degree in electrical engineering, and he was one of my profs. And I think that was the beginning of my love for electronics and radio. But I took that class and got my technician's license. I was 15 years old, and back in the old days, a long time ago, 6 meters was the 2 meters of today, and there weren't too many repeaters around. So 6 meter local traffic was pretty much it. And I had some fun with talking to individuals in the area or whatever. I begged, borrow, and stole whatever I could put together to get on the air 6 meters. I had an old Hallicrafters receiver and a converter to take 6 meters and put it into the HF receiver end, a cheap little 6 meter transmitter. And I had a lot of fun with that. And in fact, I got an award, and I wish I could find it. I got an award from the ARRL back in 1968 during the great blackout in the Northeast. It just so happened that we got our power back early in that, and I was on the radio, and I did some communications, emergency communications in the local area, including some to a local hospital that was beneficial, and I got an award for that. And I'm kind of proud of that. And that may have been the beginning of tomorrow will be 43 years as a volunteer firefighter. So, of course, I was only 15, and then life got in the way. I went off to college. I got married. I had kids. I got 10 grandkids now, whatever. And what got me really back into ham radio, not that I had lost interest in electronics, that I hadn't, computers and phones and everything else under the sun, but I'm also a weather geek, and I've been interested in weather my entire life. And I just happened to see a Sky1 class being given locally in 2019, prior to the pandemic. And I took the class. Rob Macedo, a big time Sky1 individual. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you. He's from New Bedford, and he's tied into the Boston Norton National Weather Service office. And he's big into ham, and been on the nets with him or whatever during Sky1 activations. But he gave the class. I was probably the only person taking the class that didn't have their ham license. Everybody had their HT with them or whatever, and one of the things you could fill out on the application to get your certificate was your ham license or whatever. And I said I had a ham license. It'd be cool to get back into it. And he was the instigation. And work I was still heavy into I own my own company with my brother, and still heavy into that or whatever. So the timing wasn't right, but all of a sudden a pandemic hit, and had a lot of free time, and couldn't go out to eat. So what to do? Get the study materials or whatever and study. So I took the technician and the general test on the same night, passed them both. Electrical engineering background helped a lot. it was all about me learning the band plans and all those other things that you need to know. And I got my license on June 5th of 2020, and inside 2 years now, I have I forget how many contacts, 20 21,177 POTA contacts, which again I'm pretty proud of, and not 2 years later or whatever. So pretty interesting. And I went on and took the extra, got my extra, and now I'm a VE too. And I encourage other people. Believe it or not, I was talking to an individual who saw my antennas on my car at Dunkin' Donuts today, and he wanted to know what I knew about ham radio and how he could get his technician's license. And we had a nice long conversation. So it's pretty cool.
So I'm trying to do the math in my head. Were you licensed maybe in the 70s?
I was licensed in the 60s, 1965. Yeah, I was born in 50, and I was 15 in 1965. We were grandfathered. The testing was so more laborious in the old days. We had to do code number one, but even to get your technicians or novice or technicians, but um, the material was much more stringent. So I think until 1987, if I got the name right, if you had your technicians before 1987, and your license expired, all you had to do was pass the technician's test, and they gave you your general. And so when it came up in 2020, I had the opportunity to just take my technician, and then they would have handed me my general, and I couldn't do it because there was too much to learn. And as a VE, I still tell people today, all you did, even if you passed your extra, is got a license to learn, because you learn something new every day. And I learned something new every day.
No, that's absolutely true. Our stories match up somewhat. I got licensed in the 70s. I think it was 77, 78 when I was in high school. Life took over, let my license lapse, re-upped during COVID, and experienced the same thing. I'd been in an advanced class, so I took my technician thinking I'd be back in a couple months to take the general, and discovered that I could get the general right away. So since then, I've been studying for the extra and hope to take that soon. And you're right, it was a different experience back then in the 70s because of, I think there's a little bit more to learn, but absolutely the code element. But on top of that, I remember living in Presque Isle, Maine, up in Aroostook County, and having to drive 3 hours to Bangor in order to take the test. And there weren't very many being offered. So I love the fact that people like yourself are volunteer examiners, and it's so much easier now to find a class, number one, but also to be able to take the exam. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I love giving back. I've been a volunteer all my life. In fact, the club that I belong as a VE is a different club than the PAWA. And to their credit, they never stopped testing, even during the middle of the pandemic. There was a time there where testing wasn't going on in most places in the country. And then somebody had the bright idea of doing online testing, and that it was a big to-do about how that was going to happen and how it could be secure and all these other things. We never stopped testing. I wasn't a VE at the time, but my head VE continued to test. He had staggered testing times for everybody, so they would come in and they would sit by themselves. And if it took them 30 minutes, then the next guy would come in after him or whatever. And all of the examiners were spread out and everybody was wearing masks and all other stuff. But we never quit testing. And we test the third Monday of every month religiously to this day or whatever. And I'm glad to be a part of that.
I took my my technician exam online with 3 VEs watching me, both on the laptop and my cell phone. It was nothing more intimidating in my life than taking this test with 3 very qualified amateur radio operators watching every move in my office. Thank God I passed, because it would have been an ego blow if I hadn't. But so tell me, where did you get involved with Parks on the Air? How did that happen? Was Mike at the club the impetus for that, or did you learn of it in a different way?
I might have been the instigation. I can't remember, but I tested technician in general. 2 or 3 other individuals at the same time also passed their technician in general, and they are members of the club or whatever. Some have gone on and become POTA fanatics, others have not, or whatever. They've kind of fallen by the wayside. Other things interest them, but it was just it was coming out of the woodwork, and we had a club meeting or whatever, and somebody said, "Hey, have you guys heard about POTA? You know, and Parks on the Air?" And it was intriguing. And in my area, I don't know how it is in Maine where you are, but in my area, there's parks all over the place. A part of my repertoire is that I was the first guy to activate all of the Rhode Island parks, and at the time when I did it, I didn't realize that I was the first one, and I was shocked that I was, and particularly because you can be in any park in Rhode Island inside an hour. The state's only 48 miles wide, and it's about that tall. There's 51, I think, or 53 parks in the state, and it wasn't that hard to hit them all. I don't know how difficult it would be for you or someone that lived in Texas, say, to hit 53 parks, never mind all of their parks. Um, but so because there was parks close by, it just seemed uh, interested to get into, and portable ops or whatever, and emergency communications having to go along with Skywarn. There's sometimes, and you may have seen a picture of too that I sent you, of us doing a blizzard standby, and we've done hurricane standbys in our fire station. So if we have an incident, we're ready to rock and roll, and we don't have to travel to the station and have to dodge down trees or whatever. And the last couple of times I've had standbys or whatever, I bring my gear, and we have emergency communications. And I stick my antennas on my car, and one of the pictures I think I showed you is in the middle of a blizzard. My car's covered, but I was the guys in the station that were with me were amazed that I was talking to Bulgaria on HF. So it all fit together. But as far as parks on the air, there was a local park. There's one that I've got a kilo in or whatever. It's called Colt Park. It's within about 20 minutes drive from me. It's right on the bay, Narragansett Bay, a spectacular view, probably the nicest park in Rhode Island. And my buddies that had passed that test with me early on in 2021 decided to activate that park together. We'd see how it went. We took turns because we didn't know anything about band pass filters or any of that stuff. We were still neophytes, but we had a blast, and the rest is history.
Well, I am envious that you have so many parks close by. You asked about Maine. We have 142 parks, plus or minus, here in Maine. I think I've activated somewhere around 50 so far, and I've hit every park within, say, a 90-mile radius. And at this point, it really requires an overnight and making a plan to get multiple parks. I'm hoping to take a trip up north sometime soon, do about 10 parks. But that's been the routine now. I've gone to Greenville, activated 6 or 7 parks there, went to Lubec, activated about 4 or 5 parks in that area, Mid-Coast Maine. So that's the challenge now. To get up to northern Maine, it's going to be about a 6 or 7 hour drive, and then the logistical nightmare of trying to get to every one of them. But I'd like to do that. My longer term goal is to activate all the parks in Maine if possible. There's one island that's going to be really tricky. It seems impossible to get access to it unless you're with a scientist. So I'm up for the challenge, but I'm not quite ready for it yet. So going back to the fire department, you've been there 43 years, been affiliated with them for 43 years. Are there other ham radio operators there?
In the entire department, we're a department of 4 fire stations, about 75 firefighters, and in the group there's 2 or 3 that are firefighters, not in my station in particular. Um, I can't tell you why, except in a lot of respects, I think you have to have a little interest in electronics and radio, and a lot of the guys. One of the things that's amazing and outstanding about volunteer fire departments or whatever is everybody has a diverse background. So on any particular call, we can have a guy that's a oil burner technician, or a surgeon, or a gas station attendant or mechanic, and so you have a diverse group of individuals that can help in a lot of situations where expertise in one particular area is advantageous. And Mine happens to be electrical and electronics or whatever. I've been playing with electricity all my life or whatever. So I'm the guy they go to when we're talking about electronics or electricity. But not that many. There are the guy that's in charge of the emergency management agency in our town is a long-time ham, and he does a lot of the radio communications for the town, both the police and the fire. And we're very good friends, and he, he's a very active ham operator.
So, Fran, what's the next activation you have planned?
I just pick and choose. I'd like to get Maine. I'm trying to check off states now. I forget how many states I'm up to. About 9. I got 9 states checked off. Usually, when I travel to South Carolina, half the time I drive and half the time I fly. So when I drive, if we stay over somewhere, and I've stayed over in Virginia, North Carolina, I'd activate a park close by to the hotel or whatever. And so I've knocked off some states that way. Maryland. Believe it or not, there's a ham radio outlet which you may be familiar with in Salem, New Hampshire. Well, there's a
very familiar.
Most hams are. Well, there's a Poda Park about 10 minutes up the road from them. So I've activated that a couple of times. Go up a little early, beat the traffic from where I am to Boston, and then activate the park, and then hit ham radio outlet after they open at 10 o'clock in the morning. But I'd like to do one in Maine, and I'd like to hit Vermont. I have New York because I was in Long Island last summer, so I have New York. But I like to pick off the states a little bit at a time.
Well, you can hit an easy one in Maine, as you probably know, just crossing the border in Kittery. There's a fort. I don't recall the name. It might be Fort Henry. That's a really sweet activation, beautiful view. But if you can convince yourself to drive to Portland, I'd be happy to meet you somewhere. Mackworth Island is absolutely my favorite park in Maine. It's an island accessible by a bridge. You're activating on the beach, on the rock beach, overlooking Portland. You get the saltwater bump. I've never had a bad activation there, except the one time that I got down there without my battery. And that was that was the early days of learning to look at my checklist.
I'm going to do that. I'll look forward to that or whatever. I'm slowly but surely becoming fully retired. Again, I own my own business, and it's tough to get away from your baby that you've been with for 40 or 45 years or whatever, but it's slowly but surely happening and giving me more and more time to play. And another thing that I'd really like to do, and Bob is the instigation for that, is to do a little soda poda activation or whatever. And so that's definitely happened as the weather gets better. I am nowhere near his enthusiasm about going to the top of a mountain when there's a foot of snow. I'm not that guy.
Bob is an absolute machine. I mean, not only is he climbing to the top of mountains for soda activations, he'll still fit in a PODA activation the same day, which is remarkable to me. Like I'd be out on the couch after a climb with my radio on my back.
Yeah, and he may have worked that day because he still does house construction and renovations or whatever. He's a one-man band, and he may have done a little work that day too. He's an amazing individual, and I understand you one-upped him because you got a park before he did, or a soda site before he did. So you one-upped him. Not too many people can one-up Bob.
It certainly wasn't intentional, but I was activating Lily Bay, and he responded to the CQ. I was at a park, and we were having just a casual conversation, and then, by the way, do you intend to activate Mount Kineo? Because I want to be there first. And I'm sorry, I'm going tomorrow, buddy. But I left the soda activation for him, so he ended up going up Mount Kineo. I think he fell going up, as a matter of fact. I think he talked about that in the interview. But
I think he did. Yeah.
But Fran, you and Bob both are inspirations for all of us. I mean, I just look at your stats on Parks on the Air and how often you're out there, how many contacts you've made, and I feel like I'm a slacker. I need to get to work.
Well, even working some hours a day or whatever. Again, I have so many parks close by. One of my favorite parks is the Taunton River watershed, and you can the watershed extends about 20 miles, and so you have the coastline and little itty bitty parks. the most familiar place that I do is a little boat ramp in the town of Dayton, Massachusetts. Some of my pictures that I sent you, uh, my car is parked right near the water at that boat ramp. It's a quiet little spot, spectacular view. Um, uh, I just enjoy making contacts, particularly park to parks, and that comes to mind because I worked really hard about 2 years ago to talk to the husband and wife team who activated Alcatraz. And I had them 3-3 while I was in that park, K0891, at the Dighton boat ramp. And I waited it out and waited propagation out or whatever, and I waited the pile up out. And hours later, I made that contact and I got the QSL card to prove it or whatever. And that was spectacular. I just so enjoyed that. And then just in the recent past, I think maybe from the same site, I uh, I got a contact in Norway, and they were doing a YouTube video of their contacts that day. And don't you know, somebody spotted their YouTube video and sent it to me, and I was on the air on their YouTube video, park to park, to two guys doing a park in Norway. Park to parks. Across the continents or whatever is just spectacular to me. And I'm dying to get one in Japan or Australia. Although I have Australia, I think CW, which Bob was shocked at because uh, he's been driving me and some of the other club members to learn CW enough to activate a park. I have about 40 contacts hunting, and I'm trying to work up the gumption to do an activation. It'll be soon. I'm working on it, and Bob will be proud.
So, Fran, the Parks on the Air plaque event's coming up the 1st of June. Are you or any club members planning on participating in that?
We typically do. We don't look for uh, the monster contracts. It's just a reason to get out there. And in fact, later in May, we like to get together at least once a month in the good weather or whatever, and have a group activation. So May 27th, I think, we're activating Borderland Park, which is in the town where Bob lives, and that's probably the park he's activated the most. He tells a crazy story about uh, needing to activate a park in the middle of a blizzard a year or so ago, and the park rangers were plowing out the parking lot, and the place was closed, of course. But they knew Bob. He's a congenial guy or whatever, and they said, "We'll plow out the parking lot for you, Bob, and you can set up over there, and you can get your activation in." And he did in the middle of a blizzard in his hometown. So very very cool.
Well, Fran, I've really enjoyed talking to you today, and I can't wait to get you back in the log again. I'll look for you on Plaque Event Weekend. I intend to be on the air from K0001, Acadia National Park.
Oh yes, I have some contacts in 0001. I remember that because that's number one, right? How couldn't you forget that one?
Never activated it before, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to really go all in. So I've got a campsite for the weekend and taking a couple tents. I think my son's going to join me, and I'm going to do my best to operate on many different bands while I'm there.
Um, met some amazing people operating. Um, Dom, November Charlie 4 X-Ray Lima, who I'm sure you know. Uh, he's a tremendous photo ambassador. You know, he has health issues, and he's one of those guys that wakes up and with a smile on his face every day. He got back into radio because of POTA. I've met him twice heading to South Carolina. We made a point of meeting up just off Route 95, and he's an amazing guy. I love the guy, and I wish him well. Mike and November Tango Mike or whatever has very similar health issues, and also wakes up every day with a smile on his face. And let's see what we can get done today. They're inspiring. They really are inspiring. And the guys like Gene in France, or Paul in Alaska, or some of the other contacts I make all over the country or whatever. They chase you. It's remarkable, and I love the guys. And POTA wouldn't be POTA without those guys. And it's such a wonderful tradition. I had to tell you this little story. Um, I was setting up maybe the second or third activation of my life or whatever, at Colt Park. I love the place. In the summertime, it's the place to be. And boats and ships up and down the bay in front of you. Walkers walking the trail that is right along the seawall. It's just spectacular, beautiful. And I was setting up on my little table and my little chair, and a guy was taking pictures of the birds and the wildlife at the edge of the water, and he spotted me setting up, and he took a walk over, and he said, "Hey, you must be amateur radio, right?" And I said, "Yep. We're setting up. We're doing a little, context from here or whatever." And we talked about POTA, and he said, "Well, I'm an amateur radio operator too, or whatever." And I said, "Yep. I just got my license, but I got my license originally in 1965." And he says, "I got my license in 1965." And I said, "Well, I took the classes in Fall River at Bradford Derby Tech." And he said, "I took the classes at Bradford Derby Tech." He was in my class.
That's crazy.
At Bradford Derby Tech in 1965. And we've become friends again or whatever. And he was a 6-meter dude back in the day. And what are the chances? What are the chances of me connecting with him, by ham radio or whatever, and sitting in a park in this particular day? Just remarkable.
That's a great story. And Fran, I've got to tell you, you listed off a lot of those names that we all know on air as POTA activators or hunters, but you're amongst those. I hear your call sign a lot, not only on air, but I've got several emails from people saying, "Hey, you really need to talk to Fran with an interview. I really love the guy." So put yourself in that club.
Can I tell you another story?
Absolutely.
Another quick story. Coming up just in September, I joined the group out of the Newport, Rhode Island club, KC1NDQ. That name rings a bell. You may have got him in your POTA logs.
Jim Garman.
Jim Garman. Jim's a nicest guy. I've met him a couple of times or whatever, and he has instigated his club. Again, a funny story. He joined their field day group last year, and they gave him an oddball shift, and they weren't sure how he was going to do because he was new to ham radio. Well, he blew him out the water because he'd been doing POTA for a year. They wanted to put him in charge of the field day this year because he was so good at it. So he shocked them all. And so he's talked them all into activating all Rhode Island parks a weekend in November. I think it starts on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe the 7th, 8th, and 9th. I'm forgetting the days, whatever. And I'm going to go join that group. So I'll be activating some of the parks. And their whole point is if somebody wants to hunt all of the parks in Rhode Island, you can do it that weekend. So I'll be joining that group. So that's pretty cool.
I'll be looking for you. Fran, thanks for joining me today.
It was a pleasure, and I hope to catch you on the air very soon.
I've been talking to Fran Kelly, KC1NDQ. You'll see him on the POTA spotting page, I'm sure, or on the air. Thank you, Fran.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.